A pleasure to meet all at last, and here we are once again with HGN Season 5. For this instance, it is number 2675, and it's probably a good time for me to talk about sailing. And I won't just go into detail about what sailing basically is, but more about the history of when it all began, how sailing took to the idea of humanity hundreds of years ago. The thing is that sailing has been a process mostly adopted by travelers of the waters. For instance, in Europe, the idea of sailing ships has been around for hundreds of years, possibly even thousands of years. In fact, we know that water vessels such as boats, canoes, ships, they've been around for a very long time. They are in fact some of the oldest modes of transportation in the entire length of human history. They date back to as far back as 4000 BC, with a good majority of users, mainly of the Native American, European, and Chinese, utilizing ship technology to their best capabilities. And while many other cultures have adopted the usage of shipping via the waters, it still does harken back to a big point in history in which that there were only a few unique powers that were able to create nice big ships. Anything of the sorts that can carry large amounts of cargo across the waters. But we might as well talk about, first of all, there was the Golden Age of Sail, which spanned between the 16th and 18th centuries. Typically throughout the 1500s up until the mid 1800s, in which that it was some of the biggest parts of history relating to sail. Well, we might as well talk about the story of Christopher Columbus. He was among the first to journey great lengths across the ocean ways, chartering throughout the North Atlantic until he set sail and discovered what he thought at the time was India, when in reality it was one of many islands surrounding the United States. The thing is, that is, believe it or not, how Native Americans were called Indians. His mistaken identity led to them being referred to as, even today, what many people call Indians. But there is a real big difference to Indians, whom are actually of the country India, by the way, and of course, the Native Americans, or Navajo, as we've more commonly known them as by this point. There is a huge difference between both cultures, but I feel like we don't need to get into that at the moment. So, sailing, of course, because of Christopher Columbus's ideas, not on just sailing all the way to India, but also to prove that the world was round instead of flat. Yeah, that's quite a stupid idea to think today, when it was proven long ago that the world was round and not flat. Like, you guys gotta be kidding me on that stuff. But without a doubt, it was because of him, his courage, and bravery to sail those uncharted waters that could have potentially led to dangerous levels of failure, casualties, and of course, a loss in finances and resources. After all, it was a lot of money and wealth that the Queen and King of Spain had to lend out to Columbus, as well as a lot of people that he basically had his crews at the time. It was because of him, though, and his journeys across the waters in the Atlantic and otherwise that led to what is known as the Golden Age of Sail. And as you probably know by now, the Golden Age of Sail was a big point in history, especially between 1550 and 1650. That century alone was probably the peak of popularity of what many people know as the Age of Piracy, especially on the Spanish and British fronts, in which that wars would take place throughout various countries across Europe and some other parts of the world. And we're not just talking about Europe having their own conflicts over the waters, but others as well. Some parts of Africa and Asia would also begin to join in by that point in time. And there was even, of course, the idea of the Native Americanism in the United States, of course, prior to when a lot of people would come around, in which that sometimes there would be problems in the waters, usually in rivers and lakes, where such canoes and other water devices that the Indians would have on their own terms, they sure had their own ways on dealing with waters, but not at all like the oceans like many people did elsewhere. Other than that though, we could go into detail about piracy and how much of an impact it had, much like the Age of Sail itself, but think about it. Christopher Columbus's ideology about the world being round and his decision to go and charter throughout the western portion of the world, which of course did lead to him not only discovering the new hemisphere of the world known as the Western Hemisphere, but also the United States itself. The entirety of the western portion of the world was mainly discovered thanks to his bravery, and of course his persistence. His crews doubted him back then, even threatening to have him chained up and jailed in the brig. But we know that didn't go as planned. Either way you look at it though, you could say, while Columbus may have unintentionally created a whole new world for people to explore via the waters, it still is a big part of the reason why even today, there's a lot of ships that sail around the globe, some of which are more of the historical fronts. In fact, I could talk about my trip on a 17th century Chinook, which was one heck of a build, and also pretty old for what it was. But that's probably a story better saved for another time. So, with that in mind, the Golden Age of Sail and the process of sailing entirely, which was mainly done by cloth, nonetheless, it was a unique process that allowed for winds to guide the ships to wherever needed, and by the process of various mechanisms including pulleys and gear shafts, as well as levers, and even the usage of oars as a means to propel the boat forward. Of course, it was also from the usage of trims, which allowed for the boats to go faster or slower on the water. These larger ships, of course, would be used by wind power and the usage of sails, until the usage of motors began to take place by the 1900s. So, not much more I could say on this stuff otherwise. So stay tuned for tomorrow's episode. Make sure to like, subscribe, comment, follow me wherever you can find me, and stay on the Hollywood side for more.